With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm Sabrina Halvorson here with Lorrie Boyer. Morning, Lorrie.
Good morning.
We're going to go into our main topic in just a moment, but first we wanted to kind of issue a little bit of a warning. And this was something you just brought to my attention, Lorrie, but for our listeners, remember that tragic plane crash in DC where the helicopter collided with the airplane. On that airplane, there were a lot of figure skaters, but there was also a couple from Kansas who were farmers. And the reason that this is important is because there have been fundraisers started. There was a particular GoFundMe that was started for this farmer and his wife who were killed in this plane crash. So this GoFundMe was started. However, what's been found is that it is fake. This is a fake, fraudulent fundraiser. And so we just thought it was worth telling you guys about because we know how much, the ag community likes to support the ag community and we donate to things like this. So be aware, and Lorrie, you can go into it a little bit more too, but be aware of this fraudulent GoFundMe fundraiser that says is for Bob and Lori Schrock of Kansas who were killed in that plane crash. But in fact, it is not.
Yeah, so they were among the 60 people, which is very sad. Thoughts and prayers to all those families and those around them who died in this flight. And it happened on January 30th. I think it made national news, so I think most people would recall that happening. As you mentioned, among those also on the plane were some Russian figure skating people and then some Russian figure skating coaches. And so those folks, the Russian people, have actually hired an attorney to represent them. I don't know all the details of how or why, but what I do know is this Moscow-based criminal lawyer was doing the research for his case and came across this GoFundMe. So I'm assuming, he was gathering up as much information as he can to support his case. He needs to know all the other people who were on the plane. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know exactly why you would need all that. But the point of the matter is that he came across the Schrock's GoFundMe page, and found something that looked a little off to him. And according to this article on DTN, the main reason that he found something that looked off to him was because the campaign was listed online by a Sam Lorrie Odom of Kiowa, Kansas, and it's spelled kind of weird. And so it kind of made him think there might be something going on here. And then the amounts of money that were put in there. So there was a goal of $150,000. They allegedly raised about $17,750. But another little red flag, I guess, to this lawyer, and maybe he knows how to look for fraudulent, because to me, I don't even know if I would know this was fraudulent or not.
Right.
The amounts of money that were made, one was for $10,500 and another for $5,000. Like if I just saw that, I would think maybe, somebody who had a lot of money or an organization or something like that would have made that donation, but apparently it was a red flag to this criminal attorney.
Right. Which is very interesting. Kind of like you, I have no idea how you would look and just recognize these things, that these red flags that tell you this is something fraudulent. And that was, again, why we thought it would be important to just bring this up, because once again, these were farmers who were killed in this plane crash. And we know how the agriculture community sticks together. We help each other out. And so we donate to things like this. And so it's important to realize now this fundraiser has just been taken down, but keep your eyes open and be watchful and careful when if you should decide to donate to something like this in the future, because they are out there and they are trying to target farming families.
I think it's important to point this out because this would help me a lot. This lawyer did go ahead and email the representative about, the GoFundMe page, and the person who responded to him never gave him an actual name, only referring to themselves as a family representative, and then went on to ask for a money transfer into a Skrill, Skrill, I haven't heard of that account. So I guess the moral of the story, and I guess if I'm trying to find out if it's fraudulent, is email and see what kind of name you get, and if you can research that name. And also if they're asking for a transfer into an unidentifiable account or something that maybe makes you a little leery of where exactly is this money going?
Yes, yes, that would definitely be a red flag. If you, first off, you email them and they don't even tell you who they are, but then they want you to give money to a whole different account, not even to
Yeah.
go through the GoFundMe channels. That is definitely a red flag.
Yeah.
So again, things to watch out for. Like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about prison farms. And Lori, this was another topic that you found. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about what you found?
Yes, this is, I think, going to be an interesting conversation, but also a neat conversation. I love it when we can find ways to creatively solve problems, including saving taxpayer monies while also putting some of the folks to work that end up in jail. A Central
Mhm.
California Sheriff's Office is having inmates actually do some farming in Tulare County. I think this is just such a great idea. Tulare County Sheriff Mike Barreau, I think I'm saying that right, talks about a few years back, he had this idea to offset the cost of feeding inmates, saving taxpayer dollars. And so he came up with this concept of having inmates do farming. Now, I've heard of similar situations with maybe some garden boxes here and there, but an actual farm, I think this is really a cool thing. And I want to throw this out as a side note because I'll forget. In Canyon City, Colorado, this goes along with this. I think this is fascinating as well. Down there is a pretty big jail, and it's really known for gangs. It's a
Mm.
gang associated jail and not just Colorado gangs, like international gangs. And they have these inmates making saddles and tack and different things that all these horse people commission. I think that's just really cool. A little off subject, but it aligns with what he's saying here. So the people in this jail at the Tulare County have to go out and do different farming practices. There's about 2,200 inmates in this jail. They're fed 3 times a day. So that's where they came up with. They created farmland with cattle, hogs, and farming. And we can talk a little bit more in depth on what they're actually doing as farming. But I just think
Yeah.
this is so cool.
It is. It's really neat. And I put a little bit of research into this after you first sent it to me. And it turns out there are actually quite a few locations around the nation that do this. The
Oh,
most of what I found is in Texas, where they have actually like
okay.
a few dozen prison farm operations. But the largest I found was Louisiana. The Louisiana State Penitentiary has 18,000 acres in their prison farm. And it's along the Mississippi River, and they grow all kinds of different things on this land. Um, it doesn't say anything about livestock for their farm, but there are a number of farms around the nation, prison farms, that also have livestock operations where they grow their own beef cattle and and they have their own dairy cattle and things like that. There's also a lot of swine farming as well. And going back to the one in Tulare County, what it's so interesting because again, you've got all these prisoners that you have to feed, but now they're going out, they're working the land, they are doing their own farming, creating their own food. And so that in itself is a saving, but then they're also learning work skills so that when they leave, they have these skills that they now can go out and get new jobs with. And that was one thing that was quoted in this original article that we were reading. He said the sheriff said that the goal is that the inmates don't come back, that they are learning these skills and can create better lives for themselves. And it's more than, farming. Our listeners know, of course, because we're involved in farming, but there are a lot of different skills involved in farming. You know, anything from, especially in this Tulare farm, because they have crops and they have livestock. And again, it's a full circle um, situation. So they're learning how to grow crops. They're also learning how to deal with animals and livestock, how to everything down to butchering and things like that. So that is just such a neat idea.
I I'm glad you researched that. I did not realize that there were a lot of other prisons that had farming operations, especially that one in Louisiana. That is amazing. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
It is, but when you consider like how many prisons there are in the nation, which I wish now that I had looked that up beforehand and I haven't, this has just got to be a drop in the bucket as far as like when we consider how many prisons there are versus how many are actually doing farming. And it seems like it's something that should work at nearly all prisons. I imagine that maybe if you're right in the middle of a city and you don't have land, okay, that's gonna make it a little more difficult. Although I did see that some of these farming operations around the nation, there were a couple that I saw that did indoor farming and aquaculture and things like that. And there's another one, there's one in Colorado actually that has a fish hatchery.
I'm not aware of it. So that's,
Yeah.
I love
So
that.
many
That's really cool.
Yeah, there's just so many opportunities here. And it makes sense, especially in Central California,
Mhm.
that of course you're going to have farming involved. It just makes total sense. I also just found out that the Central California Women's Facility also has a farming program too. So it is, I don't know, I see this as good all the way around.
Yeah, yeah. This one where we started in Tulare County, a couple of little notes on here that I think is pretty cool is there's a certification program even which inmates can go in and learn how to be certified butchers. I think this is great. It goes to your point on turning our lives around and being productive citizens once they get out. And we are in need of people that have this kind of skill set. So that's a bonus there. They also have USDA certified staff that go in and teach these inmates and certify them so when they can go out to the field they can utilize their skills. So it's not just a prison certification, it's actually a USDA certification. So I just kudos to this whole operation. I think this is great.
Yeah, isn't that so neat that they can bring in US people who can do these USDA certification classes so that we've heard of other programs that offer life skills or and degrees and things while you're incarcerated, but to have USDA certification as well, I don't know. I just see that as being a big benefit.
Yeah, yeah, I like this article that we're looking at, MSN.com. The sheriff says he's fiscally responsible for the money that comes in here. They save anywhere between 1.2 and 1.6 million dollars to the taxpayer each year. Wow.
Interesting. We're talking this morning about these unique programs in some prisons around the nation that teach prisoners about farming and really go beyond just teaching them. We were just talking about one in Tulare County that offers USDA certification in different things. And again, I'm just so impressed with that.
I really like the fact too, you went ahead and sent me the link that when we were talking about the one in the prison farm in Mississippi, I think it is.
Louisiana.
Louisiana. Thank you. I
Mhm.
like too that they each cater to their region. So there's logging and quarrying and mining in Louisiana. And here in California, we're talking about vegetables and livestock and eggs. They grow, have chicken and collect their own eggs. So I like that it's also regional specific. That makes it even more special because I don't know a lot about how the prison system works and such, but I'm guessing that a lot of inmates that get released can't go real far for a while.
Yeah, honestly don't know much about how the prison. Thankfully, neither of us have really had a lot of experience in that category. But yeah, it seems even if they are able to move and things, that you don't have a lot of resources when you come out of prison, according to the TV shows I've watched. I'm not an expert on this by any means, but I just think that it's always a good idea to set people up to succeed.
Yeah, I agree with you. And a lot of these folks, it also keeps them busy and you have to feel validated, I think. And productive people want to feel validated. This is another way to make them feel validated, I would imagine.
Yeah. I'm looking through this list, and I have to say, we found this list on Wikipedia, and it's talking about prison farms, and they list by state the different prison farms available. And it's so interesting to me to see some of these. Just starting off with the top of the list in Alabama, the Draper Correctional Facility, it just says farming, but right underneath that, another one in Alabama, it talks about cattle and agricultural operations. They also have vegetable gardens, which, of course, Alabama is another specialty crop state, so there's a lot of the right conditions for vegetables. Same thing with cattle. Alabama, a big cattle state as well. Like you said, the regional aspects of this, they're learning what works in their region. That just makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And it also looks like in most cases, of course, the food they raise is used right there for prisoners, but any excess, then they sell and they make money. I don't know where that money goes at the end of the game, but I'm sure it goes back into the farm to sustain it for the cost of inputs and goods and feed and other things that are needed to maintain the farm.
It's got to. I know that I did read, not in this article, but in just doing a little bit of other research as well, that there have been some problems listed about some inmate farm programs. For example, the inmates aren't they don't get paid really, or if they do, they're not paid very much. And they may not get as much training or have the right type of safety because the prisons don't have to meet the same codes and requirements as a private farm would. Um, Sometimes they don't have as many like worker protections like workers' comp and that kind of thing. So there are some people who see this as maybe not being as positive as we see it, but I still think, I don't know, I still see it as being a very win situation. I'm sure that there's probably some, like with anything, there's going to be issues that have to be worked out. But anytime that you can get, first off, just teach people how to make themselves more sustainable, again, I see as being in a good situation.
Yeah, and those are all good points. I'm sure that there is that side and those issues that have to be taken into account as
Mhm.
well. Yeah, that you bring up some good points with those things that I really hadn't thought about, but you're kind of running a business here, so I suppose you have to look at all those different aspects.
Yeah. I also saw that on this list here too that the Corcoran prison, they have a dairy and milk processing facility, which again,
Oh,
Central
wow.
California dairy completely makes sense in this area. It's an area with a lot of dairies. And so that again, if you've been in Corcoran, Corcoran's kind of it's just known around the state. So if you've been in Corcoran, it's you're gonna probably run into some issues coming out and trying to get a job. But to come out of that and to be in that area and to have that dairy and milk processing experience that you learned, I think is going to be a step into rebuilding life after incarceration.
Yeah, yeah, and just learning not only the skills of farming, but learning to be in a work setting again, learning to work as a team and other people and having set hours, all those things I can only see would benefit inmates.
I Yeah, that's how I see it too. Again, I'm sure there are some drawbacks. I can't
Yeah.
really think of any, but yeah, it's such an interesting situation. We're talking this morning about prison farms, and before this morning, really, neither one of us had known much about them or that they even existed, really. And there are several around the nation. And again, I just see this as being such a win. In Texas, again, Texas has the most that I've seen, several dozen. I haven't counted how many are on this list, but by far the most. Texas is a very big state. They probably need to have a lot of prisons, I would guess. But they have a lot of different types of farming operations in their prisons. I saw in this list, I saw one of them, they have a cotton ginning operation. And how
Oh,
interesting is that? That they are able to provide that type of real world experience for the inmates. And then what do you do
yeah,
with
well,
cotton?
it goes with that. Yeah, that discussion, like being regional. So there's a lot of
Hmm.
cotton in Texas. So that makes sense.
I'm very curious what they do with the cotton that they produce from there.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe they make clothes.
Maybe they do. Maybe they make their own prison uniform outfits. That would really be full circle. So I'm finding bull management and swine operations. There's another Texas unit that has horse breeding. You could go help them with that. You know all about horse breeding.
Yeah, and that makes me think about a movie that was based, I think, on a prison, but it was more rodeo stock. Like
Mm,
they had their own rodeos, but they raised their own stock for it, and so they had to feed the animals and all those things. The same concept.
yeah. There's a prison in North Carolina that has a cannery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, again, very interesting. A lot of egg production. I would think right now egg production is going to be even more popular. It seems if they're able to sell, a lot of these are growing food for the inmates, but and like you mentioned, they sell the extra. Could you imagine how much money they could make with selling extra eggs right now?
Yeah, no kidding, right? Exactly. You were talking about the prison in Colorado. I actually found it where they're raising fish for
Hmm.
meat. They're also raising goats and buffalo.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a lot, and that's a lot of variation too. So you're learning about fish and water buffalo, two completely different species, and everything is going to be different about those two animals. So you just have the opportunity to learn so much.
Yeah, Canyon City is a great area for any of those kinds of things. So that actually makes sense to me.
Is it? So I also found in Florida where they do lumber as well. So that's a whole nother industry tied in with agriculture, of course, but you can learn about the lumber industry. And again, we're setting people up for success once they get out of jail so that they don't have to revert back to their old lifestyles.
Yeah, this is just it's a neat concept. Yeah,
It-
and the people who are managing and running these prison farms, I'm sure there's a lot of skill set just in that because I'm guessing you run them just like a business. So you got to know the accounting, you've got to know procurement. And I don't know if the prisoners are doing that or not, it doesn't really say that. But there's people who are involved in that side of things too.
Yeah. Here I found that in Alaska they have hydroponics. Hydroponics is the word I couldn't think of earlier. We go through that sometimes, lose our words. But even if they don't have or aren't able to do some things outside, you can use hydroponics in an indoor setting. So even in areas where the prison you don't have the right type of situation outside for these, you can still learn some types of agriculture. And hydroponics is becoming even more increasingly popular. So that would be, I think, a really good skill to be learning now.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, it's a whole new world here this morning, isn't it?
I know we're learning a lot about prisons and farming. Who knew? Who knew, right? The places that this show takes us. Honestly, it's something I've never thought about before, but it just makes so much sense. In not to lump prisons and schools together, but I'm going to. Because I also think school gardens and things like that make so
Oh
much
yeah.
sense. Anytime where you've got a large amount of people and you have to feed them, it makes so much sense to be teaching them how to grow and to grow the food for that area. Just because we're teaching people to be more sustainable, we're giving them life skills, and there's a lot of pride in being able to grow your own food. And I think it works in both of these situations. When my daughter was in school, she had a school garden, and it was a very progressive thing at that time. I would dare to say that her school was one of the only ones in Fresno County to have um, a school garden. And it was so unusual. And this was, gosh, 15 years ago. I don't want to talk about how old my daughter is because it makes me even older. But back then, 15 years ago, this was still a really new idea, having school gardens. But it was so neat to go to the school and see the kids working in the garden and learning about their vegetables and how to plant them and why it's important to take care of the plants. And they were learning, sure, it was gardening, so it was very small scale, but they were learning about agriculture and about how important it is as well, and about all the things you go through to grow food. And so they were gaining more of an understanding and appreciation for agriculture as well. And I just loved that idea.
Yeah, I see the alignment though that you're talking about. It's the farm to table concept.
Hmm.
So schools, prisons, other entities are doing it. And anytime, no matter what your background or what your walk in life is, when we can connect someone to agriculture and know where their food comes from, it's a win.
Yeah, absolutely it is. And that helps, I think, down the road too, like later on when going back to the students, when these students grow up and become voters, especially in California, when we deal with so many issues that go to voters that have consequences for agriculture, and we see it so often that the voters don't have a base knowledge of agriculture and
Uh-huh.
don't understand completely what they're voting on, and they make decisions that deeply affect our farmers and can really have detrimental consequences for farmers. When they grow up knowing more about agriculture and having experienced some of it, first off, they feel more aligned with it, but then they're also going to make better educated decisions when they're voting and making these decisions. So that's a long-term effect that these school gardens can actually have in some situations that could also be beneficial for farmers down the road.
I could not agree with you more. And maybe had we had more of that, because I know this is an emerging thing, had we had more of that, maybe we wouldn't have wolf reintroductions in Colorado.
There's so many things where, maybe, and I understand it's not always that they don't understand. They have just values that align in certain ways, and that's fine.
Sure.
Everybody should be able
You're
to vote
right.
to their values. Absolutely, 100%. But there are situations where it's just a lack of understanding. And so having growing up with it and understanding it better helps you to make more educated decisions.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And you're absolutely right. Some of that is a values type system, belief system vote. So there is that too.
sure, right, there is. But then there's also, we just don't know about this, so we're going to vote the
Mhm.
way we have heard we should vote. I don't know.
Kind of
Yeah,
the fantasy idea of it, uh,
yeah.
like the romantic idea of these beautiful creatures coming back to the state when they're doing so much damage and costing those taxpayers that voted it in a lot more money than they realized.
Yeah. And that's the situation in so many things.
So many things. You're right. Not just wolves. You're right. A
No,
lot of things. Yeah.
we've been talking about a few different things this morning, but primarily prison farms. Lori and I were talking, and we looked at another angle of this. And there are a lot of angles. We've brought up a lot of the positives of this. We both see a lot of positives to teaching inmates to farm. But there is another side, and that is there are people who say this is forced labor. They compare it to slavery. We're not necessarily doing that, but these are some of the comments that we are seeing as well. And that's valid. And so we thought we would bring that up as well.
Yeah. It just the other side. We always try to have a balanced discussion when we can. And
Hmm.
there is that. So, as much as we think this is such a great idea, there are people out there and organizations out there that don't really agree. They feel like it's illegal use of prisoners and illegal use of a workforce. If you just do a quick search for like prison farms, there's lots of different points of view and articles on there. There is one that this is an older articles from 2021 on CGTN. I'm not going to pull that up right now, but the headline here is Slavery is Alive and Kicking in U.S. Cotton Prison Farms. So, not everyone is on board with having prisoners do farming practices. And I suppose it is probably a case by case situation. I'm sure that there's a lot more people who are way more invested in this than we are. But just to bring up another angle here that
Yeah.
not everyone agrees that prison farms are beneficial and that inmates should be working, or in some cases farmed out is one of the quotes they use, or forced into labor.
Yeah, and that's a valid point. It's absolutely a valid point, and I can see what they're saying. My question is, and I don't think that we are the right people to answer it, but my question is it actually forced labor? Are they forcing the inmates to go work on the farm? And is that part of when you commit a crime and then you're found guilty and you're sentenced, work, it seems like it's valid that doing work to support your room and board while you're incarcerated seems like to me, it seems reasonable.
Yeah, and I think going back to some of the TV shows we watch or some of the documentaries where they show life in prison, prisoners get to choose their different jobs and chores, if you will. That's what I call it growing up, different things that they do within the prison. So I would assume, and I'm just assuming here, that prisoners would get to make a choice on whether or not they want to farm, on whether or not they want to be certified.
Yeah, I have just nothing to draw any information from on that. I know remarkably little about the prison system, except that I never want to be in it.
Yeah, me either. And maybe, just maybe, this is just me making assumptions and connections because of what we do. We connect dots every day, that it goes back into maybe some of the prison camp, the labor farm camps, that notion that when people are thinking about this is what they visualize.
Yeah. But it just still either way, it is such an interesting topic, and the idea of teaching prisoners how to be in charge of their own food and their land and things like that, and giving them these work skills again that they can use, especially like we were talking about earlier. The prison farms are very directed at the areas that they're in. So when prisoners are released, they have the skills that are relevant in their areas as well. Again, like talking about dairy and vegetable farming in Central California, totally makes sense. cotton ginning in Texas. Again, completely makes sense. So they're getting skills that can be used immediately when they leave without having to travel to a whole different part of the nation where they've learned whatever skills.
Yeah, I agree with you. If I think about that, what you want to get out of your time there, rather, like I said, I believe they do have to do some form of work, like laundry service and cafeteria service and cleaning and
Right.
things like that, that this would be one option. It's one option that I would choose.
Yeah, I would too. You get to be outside. In most of these cases, you get to be outside in the fresh air and away from other people, which is what that's always what I prefer. Just put me outside in some fresh air with no peoples. I'll choose
Yeah,
that every
yeah,
time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So again, there's two sides to everything. Some of these articles point out that these incarcerated laborers are like indentured service. They don't get pay, no benefits, no legal protections. But like you talked about, it's like paying for your room and board.
Right.
And we're all taxpayers, including them. And not all of them are paying taxes while they're sitting in prison. So this is a form of paying those taxes.
That's the way that I see it. Of course, I'd want them to be treated
Oh,
humanely and
yes,
no matter what.
absolutely.
Well, I can't say no matter what. I do have some very hard feelings about some crimes, but we should be treating them humanely and things like that. But I would say that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Here's some ag news to finish out our day today. America's sugar beet farmers descended on Capitol Hill to talk to their elected officials. Chad Smith reports.
With a 5-year farm bill now 2 years overdue, sugar beet and sugarcane farmers from across the country are in Washington, D.C. to tell Congress they need a new farm bill as soon as possible. This is Gus Hasbargen's first time participating in the annual fly-in meetings organized by the American Sugar Alliance. Farmers like the Hasbargen family need a strong safety net to keep their family farming legacies alive.
Our family farm is just outside of Breckenridge, Minnesota, and we're incredibly proud to be a fourth-generation farmer, with 3 generations working together today. For us, growing sugar beets isn't about making a living, it's about carrying on a legacy. My great-grandpa was one of the first farmers in our area to raise sugar beets. He saw the potential in this crop, and today, we're still building on what he started. It's amazing to look out at the fields and know that the same land has sustained our family for generations. And that's what we want to protect, not just for ourselves, but for the next generation of farmers.
Farmers say meeting face-to-face with members of Congress is key to ensuring they understand the importance of preserving a strong U.S. sugar policy in the Farm Bill.
There's nothing more valuable than putting a face to the farm and helping our elected representatives understand what we do. It's easy to talk about policies and numbers, but we're here to remind them that behind every policy decision, there are real farmers, real families, and real communities. U.S. sugar policy ensures a stable, affordable supply of sugar, strengthens our supply chain, and helps support our rural economies. We want to make sure that leaders in Washington understand why it's so important to keep it that way.
Sugar production in America touches communities coast to coast, supporting more than 151,000 jobs and driving more than $23.3 billion in annual economic impact.
Many people may not realize that we're much more than just the farm. My family grows sugar beets from Mindak Farmers Cooperative, and the cooperative is a cornerstone of our region. It doesn't just provide jobs for farmers. It provides jobs for workers, truck drivers, and so many others who rely on the stability of the sugar industry. And the impact just isn't felt in rural areas. It stretches into urban centers, local businesses, and beyond. So we're not just in Washington advocating for our farmers. We're fighting for families, businesses, and communities that rely on American-grown sugar.
Hasbargen looks forward to returning to the family farm when he graduates from the University of Minnesota this spring.
It's critical to have stability and certainty in place so we can plan ahead. We need to know that the policies we rely on today will still be there, so we can keep doing what we love and growing the crops that feed America. I can't wait to get back on the farm.
You can learn more about sugar production in America and why sugar beet and sugar cane farmers like Gus Hasbargen need a strong farm bill by visiting sugaralliance.org. Chad Smith reporting.
A desert plant with a unique name continues to draw increasing interest from researchers looking at its potential as a source of rubber and latex for various products. Rod Bain reports.
Today's spelling challenge. Spell the word Wayuli. Puzzled looks how to spell it, I see, let alone how to use it in a sentence. First things first. Katrina Cornish, if you would, please.
Guayule.
Thank you. And this USDA researcher has extensive knowledge and study on Wayuli.
Typical looking desert shrub. It's got silvery grey leaves, little flowers. It's actually in the sunflower tribe, though you'd never think it to look at it. It's native to the Chihuahuan Desert of north central Mexico and southern Texas, the Big Bend region.
And why the scientific interest in this plant? Its properties as a natural rubber producer. A history of such going as far back as the Mesoamerican era of Mexico and Central America. Think ancient civilizations such as the Mayans and the Toltecs. In modern times,
the early Model Ts, for example, about a quarter of the rubber used for tires at that time was Wayuli rubber imported from Mexico.
In this day and age, over 50,000 items use natural rubber, from healthcare equipment to earthquake building isolators. Cornish and colleagues at the Arid Land Agricultural Research Center in Arizona are studying how to scale up Wayuli-based rubber production and, in turn, provide a significant domestic supply of rubber.
We have farmers interested in growing it. We have manufacturers interested in buying the rubber to make it into things. We're missing that processing piece. How do you get the rubber out of the plant? Who is going to pay for that processing plant?
The production expansion is fueled by both potential economic opportunity, but also possible supply chain disruption.
When the rubber supply chain is interrupted, like in World War II or the oil embargo years when synthetic rubber became so expensive, natural rubber went with it, things like this, the tire industry has been most concerned and the ones most likely to put money into trying to develop these alternatives.
USDA study also focuses on development of Wayuli-based high-performance rubber and latex products that fit an unmet need in the market. For example,
the radiation attenuation glove. This is a glove that the surgeons and healthcare workers wear to protect their hands from the radiation source in the hospital.
Wayuli's properties as a soft, stretchy latex material capable of containing more radiation attenuation filler provides greater protection and feel compared to gloves made of tropical rubber and meets several Food and Drug Administration requirements. Another product, balloons holding tracheal ventilator tubes in place during medical procedures. One made of Wayuli-based latex as an FDA-confirmed non-allergenic latex product would address a major issue with such latex balloons made from natural rubber.
With type 1 latex allergy, it became dangerous for a significant number of people to have the balloon made from that when they might have an anaphylactic reaction or severe edema or swelling to the contact of their trachea with the balloon.
I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
That's our show for today. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. For Lorrie Boyer and myself, thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.